Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project update video for this 1/6 scale Armortek Early Production German Tiger 1. Since the last video update, a lot of progress has been made to the model suspension, and we'll be going over these additions and modifications in this video. Starting with the suspension, before I can actually do the swing arms, I have to first install the swing arm mounts as well as the lower hull brace. As the way the Armortek kit is designed, these two components here bolt to the bottom portion of the lower hull. Without this brace installed, as you can see, the lower plate still has a little flex to it. Once these components are bolted to the lower plate, this flex here will be eliminated and the bottom will be completely true. In addition, for bottom support, as you can see, all of the mounting holes for the swing arms are present on these components here, and this is actually where the swing arms are bolted and mounted to the tank and where they actually function. This exact same setup has been used on Armortek tanks for a little while, and this version here is very similar to the one that was used on the last late production Tiger 1 that I recently finished. However, since that model, Armortek has made some improvements and revisions to this piece in order to give the suspension a little more rigidity. With the lower hull modifications out of the way, it's now time to start adding on some detailed components, namely first starting with the final drives. Like with all Armortek tanks, the final drives are in a similar format. You have the two final drive bell housings, the two drive gears, some ball bearings, as well as two seals. Like I mentioned on my other Armortek builds, the basic setup of the Armortek final drives are very well done and well thought out. They're very robust and very durable and perform very well when the tank is finished and in operation. The pieces assemble easy and also effortlessly. Currently, the parts that you see here are ready for assembly. What was done to get them up to that point was on the bell housing itself. I simply just went ahead and added a coat of primer to both the interior and exterior portions. As for the final drive gear, like what I also mentioned on a lot of my Armortek build videos, is that the way the pieces are machined from Armortek, there's a small little burr that is in the center portion here of this gear casing piece. The burr itself was deleted with a Dremel, thus making it for a nice flush appearance, which when mounted to the flat side of the hull will make for a nice flush fit, and everything will also fit a lot better. It's a simple addition to make and doesn't take any time. And here go the final drives with their seals installed. At this point now they are ready for their bearings. Now when it comes to the little seal, it's a rubber green seal like this, like the way we have them here, and there is a small little recess that is machined into the casing. Now it's important to note that these pieces here have to be inserted a certain way. Orientation is key. If the piece is installed backwards, when it comes time to install the main drive gear, the piece will not fit on properly and will lead to some issues. As you can see, the way it's installed is that the channel portion of the seal faces outward, and this flush portion of the seal is what gets braced against the inside of the recess. As for the installation, it is a tight squeeze. You first try to put in by hand, and then with that of a blunt flathead screwdriver, you go ahead and firmly press down on the piece, making sure it seats in properly. Once it is at this point, you are now ready to add the ball bearings. And here goes the final drive gear just prior to installation into the bell housing. As you can see, I went ahead and thoroughly lubricated the gear itself with a liberal amount of grease. This is very important to do on these builds, as this part here is what is going to be subject to wear and tear with the main drive motor, as well as with adding the grease, it helps preserve the steel, preventing it from any further rusting and other type of oxidation corrosion, as well as with the layer of grease. It will lubricate the component on the bell housing as well as on the side of the tank's hull, which will in turn make the tank run a lot smoother and perform a lot better. Once the piece is thoroughly lubed, it simply gets inserted into the bell housing. And here go the final drives now, all fully lubricated up and ready for installation. For the installation, it's going to be done strictly out of box with the kit supplied fasteners. And these pieces are simple installation. However, it's important to note that a drop of Loctite is absolutely required on these components here, as you do not want the bolts rattling loose, which can cause serious issues that are simply not wanted. Also, at this stage, I can install the tank's motor mounts. For the Tiger 1, the Armortek kit contains these two very large and robust aluminum discs. These pieces here are all CNC machined, as well as pre-tapped and threaded. These junctions here are what connect to the tank's side hull, and this is the component here that the motor actually mounts to. This layout here is pretty much standard on all of the Armortek German tanks that have been released, from the Panther, King Tiger, and the Tiger 1. They're simply going to be primed and then are going to be mounted and installed to the vehicle. And here are the bars that were shown in the previous scene, but now are ready for installation. All I did to get them ready for installation is to give them a thorough coat of gray primer. And here goes the suspension components all laid out. All these components that you see here are needed to assemble the torsion bar suspension. From left to right, we have here the torsion bars themselves. Like all Armortek tanks, they have a thick and a thinner torsion bar for use on different locations of the hull. Just checking from the open bag, as you can see, Armortek went ahead and pre-ground on the flats on the steel rods themselves. In the past, this procedure would have to be done by the builder in order to give a nice flat surface area for the mounting fasteners to grab onto. Moving on from the steel rods takes us to these two bags here. Inside these bags are lots of CNC'd steel cylinders. The purpose of these components is that this is what the swing arm or the torsion bar actually mounts to, and then this location here will then be bolted to the correct location on the large bar, which is mounted on the inside of the tank. This part here is actually what gets fastened to the tank, and once secured in place is what allows the swing arm resistance to actuate. There are two separate bags because, again, for the two size diameters of the steel rods. As for this bag here, we have a bunch of CNC'd brass bushings. These bushings here are what the swing arm axle actually rotates in once installed to the vehicle. This bag here contains the actual swing arms. Like all Armortek kits, the swing arms are made out of aluminum and are CNC'd. For the actual axles themselves, they are made out of CNC'd steel shafts that are pre-threaded and thread into the aluminum swing arm frame. Armortek has used this system for a number of years and it works very well. As for the two sides of bags, again, this is to accommodate the two different size steel rods for the torsion bars. As for these two bags here, these are the actual road wheel axles and have different spacers in them due to the Tiger 1's inner and outer wheel. Finally, one last bag is that of rubber O-rings. The O-rings that you see here are sandwiched in between the hull and the horizontal bar and act as a seal which prevents any type of foreign debris or moisture entering into the swing arm axle. These O-rings here are a relatively new addition to the Armortek German tank kits and have been issued to their kits from, I believe, the 2008-2009 time period. And here are the swing arms just prior to assembly. Just like all Armortek kits, the swing arm consists of three components: a CNC steel axle for the mounting onto the road wheel, a CNC steel axle for mounting to the vehicle, and a center portion which is made out of CNC'd aluminum billet. The pieces are nicely done and are actually very, very strong and will hold up with years of wear and tear. On this current version of the Tiger 1, Armortek redesigned their swing arms, making them a little bit smaller in size, which is actually more to scale, while keeping the same amount of strength. One nice feature that Armortek built into the piece, however, is that of these two set screws. If anyone is a frequent viewer of my channel, you will see that on my previous Armortek builds, to lock the axle to the swing arm, I usually drill a hole right through and put in a pin in order to prevent the pieces from ever walking out or getting loose. On these new versions of the Tiger 1, Armortek went ahead and added this feature, only instead of using a pin, they used 2 grub screws. And here goes the swing arm now with the 2 axles mounted. The axles thread onto the component, just like they do on the other variations of the swing arms from the other Armortek tanks. When it comes to installing them, you still want to put a little bit of Loctite on the threads and tighten them all the way down. Now, it is crucial that the components are fully seated into the piece, so when it comes time to threading them on, what I like to do is I like to put the piece in the vise in order to go ahead and torque the component onto the aluminum fully. With that done, that ensures that the components are all synchronized and are all in spec with each other, and that once the wheels are installed, they will all line up appropriately. Keep in mind, on a Tiger 1 or any type of interleaved wheeled German tank, this is absolutely crucial, or else the wheels will rub up against each other and or cause issues with the track teeth. Even though the swing arm component is pre-drilled and tapped by Armortek, you still need to put some kind of indentation onto the steel axles. Otherwise, even with the set screw installed, it will still have a hard time grasping onto the round surface and can still lead to some slippage. Even though the swing arm itself is pre-drilled and tapped by Armortek, you will still need to put some kind of indentation into the steel shafts, as the set screw gripping onto the component alone will still lead to slippage, as the piece is round and the grub screw will still need some kind of meat to grab and lock onto. Unlike the torsion bars, in which you can ground off a flat in order to mount on the piece, due to the circumference and threading of the axles, that is not going to be capable of being done. The way I did the mounting on this vehicle is that after the pieces were installed, I will be drilling through the hole with a 1/8 of an inch drill bit. The 1/8 of an inch drill bit will drill into the steel, leaving a divot and allowing a cavity for the grub screw to actually thread and lock into. As for how much material to remove, anywhere between a 1/16 inch to a 1/8 of an inch divot should be suffice in successfully locking on the axles with the grub fasteners. Now, because this component here is made out of steel and this component here is made out of softer aluminum, you're going to have to be careful when drilling the hole. Since the piece is threaded, special care is going to have to be done in order to keep the piece nice and centered, in order to protect the threads from getting marred. The 1/8 of an inch drill bit fits in perfectly in between the threads and does not make contact with the threads, and only allowing it to get access to the axle. Now, with the threads on the axle, the bit may want to wander a bit, and which will make contact with the side of the aluminum. It is crucial that you use a very sharp and new drill bit for this procedure, as the sharp drill bit will have easy work in digging through the steel, which will prevent it from swaying and eating the wrong component. Now, in worst case scenario, and there is an accident in which the threads do get destroyed and the grub screw cannot be used, not all is lost. If that shear happens, you simply drill all the way through the component and replace the screw with either a roll pin or another type of steel pin, which would then get crimped into location with pretty much the exact same procedure that I've done on the older Armortek builds. As for drilling it out, I'll be doing this in real time to show the procedure in action. And here, the swing arm has now been thoroughly drilled out and is ready for the grub screws. If the camera can focus in, you'll see that the threads on the original aluminum component are completely intact, and the divots are now deep and present, which will allow a good area for the grub screw to lock in, thus preventing any chance of the axles from getting loose while in operation. And here go all the torsion bars now fully assembled. As you can see, in addition to having the shafts put on, the actual torsion bar itself, as well as end cap, has now been mounted. Just like with most Armortek builds, the kit supplies you with the grub screws in order to mount on the components in a flush manner. Now, some of the fasteners do protrude from the mount that you see here. In order to fully make it slip onto the bushings in a lot more smoother fashion, these grub fasteners here will be buffed away with the Dremel, ensuring for a nice smooth surface. As for all of the components on this suspension here, as well as basically on every single fastener on the tank, strong Loctite is going to be your best friend and is used on literally every single fastener that you see here. Also, like what was mentioned before, there are two styles of torsion bars. Thicker ones for the front four wheels of the vehicle, and thinner versions for the remainder swing arms in the center. As for how to distinguish the two apart, the kit is very well illustrated in its part bags. They have all the item numbers on them, which correspond to the instruction sheet that we have here. Once everything is built and painted, it's easy to distinguish the two types of components apart, in that the version with a third little dimple on both the end mount as well as on the swing arm axle itself is the version for the thinner torsion bar, while the thicker torsion bar do not have those little indentations. This will help the builder in keeping the pieces all properly orientated during the assembly and installation of the parts. One tip to keep in mind when assembling these torsion bars is that the length of the entire torsion bar needs to be set at a certain length. When assembling the piece, it is good to test fit a version of the torsion bar together and do a dry run. By doing that, you will see if the torsion bar needs to be adjusted, either shortened or pushed away, in order for the end cap to fully be seated into its position in the hull, and so that there is no gap in between the swing arm and the hull itself. The way I did this was on one of the torsion bars here. Just one here was used as the test piece. With a Sharpie, I went ahead and put a little indentation on where the end cap would be fitted. This, when I was assembling all the other components, I went ahead and measured each piece, comparing it to this one here. By doing that, that ensures complete consistency with all of the torsion bars and swing arms, so when mounted, everything will be in a constant manner. Now that all the other ones are assembled, this guy here will be attached. One recent design difference from the newer versions of the Armortek Tiger compared to the earlier units that came out over the years is that of the way the system mounts to the tank. Previous versions, you would have to add a flap to the torsion bar in the position that you would want the swing arm to be mounted on. Recently, Armortek redesigned their system to have this large plunger over here. The purpose of this is that with a fastener gripping into this mount, the hull side is fastened to the side of the tank, and it grabs onto this mount, keeping the piece in place and preventing it from moving around. The advantage about this system is that you can adjust the height of the tank on the fly, thus keeping everything nice and unison without the need to grind away any flaps. However, that system, in my opinion, did leave room for slippage even though it was tightened firmly. In the past, I would go ahead and modify this system by adding on a flap and a lock fastener in order to keep everything in place. Since then, Armortek has redesigned the system again to the layout that we have here. This version here still retains the center fastener to lock it to the hull, but Armortek also has another fastener which crimps it down on the bottom portion. In addition to that design, I'm still going to go ahead and add the flat in the appropriate location so that the suspension has absolutely no chance of it ever loosening and sagging with use. In order to cut the flat, I'll be utilizing my jig that has the torsion bar set at a 45-degree angle and allows me a position to go ahead and mark and grind away the amount of material in order to have the torsion bar ready for installation. And here go the swing arms, now primed and temporarily fixed to the model. Currently one whole side is completed, and the tank is now waiting to have the opposite side get up to the same specs. As you can see, these swing arms are positioned in, however they are not set yet at their appropriate angles. The angles will be set once the opposite side is in the same format that you see here. Prior to installing any of the suspension components, the very first step is to install the brass bushings. The brass bushings are a simple installation. You simply just insert them into the cavity that is designed in the lower hull bulkhead. As for adhesives, I personally use red Loctite in order to keep the pieces in their place. However, a myriad of adhesives can also be used for this application. Anything from super glue all the way up to seal and silicone. With the bushings out of the way, it is then time to install the rubber O-ring. The rubber O-rings are supplied with the kit and are designed to keep any type of dirt and moisture from entering into the tank from the bushing. These components here are a recent addition to Armortek tanks, and since they added them, has been a very nice feature. As for the installation, it's a drop-in install. The way the kits are designed is that when the bulkhead gets mounted to the lower hull, there's a small little recess in this location here. This recess is the perfect diameter of the rubber O-ring. As for installation of the O-ring, you simply insert it into the recess by first pushing it in with your finger, and then what I like to use is a Allen wrench to go ahead and snag the O-ring until finally it pops into place. It may take some fiddling, however, once installed, the piece will not come out. And there's the component now fitted to the vehicle. And here are the swing arms now ready for installation. As you can see, since the last video seen, they have been primed, just like on the other Tiger one that I just did a video on. I like to mask up the areas of the swing arms in which the piece rotates in the bushing, as well as where the wheels eventually rotate on the swing arm. Also, if we can notice since the previous scene, I went ahead and removed the mount, which is affixed to this portion here. The reason for that is that, as it turns out, the bushing is actually too small for the steel piece to slip on. In order to install the component, I had to first remove the mount, install the swing arm into the tank, and then once inside the tank, the piece gets reinserted and re-Loctited in place. One advantage is that since the piece has already been pre-measured out and the piece has been primed, you can see exactly where the component needs to be reinstalled, which actually saves some time during the final installation. Just prior to the installation of the component, just like I mentioned on the other Tiger 1 build video, I go ahead and add grease to the bare metal section here that is going to slide into the bushing. With a finger full of grease, I evenly smear the component. Once the component is fully lubricated, it can then be inserted into its proper location. Just prior to the installation of the component, it's important to install the kit supplied lock washer to the proper recess location. This component here helps the mount grip onto the bulkhead, thus sandwiching it and giving it greater resistance when the tank is assembled. It's a very simple component to add. You just simply put it into the recess. However, it's one that is very easy and quickly overlooked, and is one that will leave you frustrated in having to unassemble all of the swing arms in order to install the component. So it's important to assemble this as you go along. And here are the swing arms now all and fully mounted to the lower hull. If we constantly focus here on the top, you will see a row of button head fasteners. These fasteners here were added by myself and were not originally part of the kit. If we can recall, these fasteners here grip onto the large plunger of the swing arm mount and locks it in place. Now what's interesting is that the components come pre-tapped from Armortek, and I went ahead and simply added M6x10 button head screws. You can possibly use grub screws of the same size. However, I feel that the button head screws give you a lot more of a sufficient work area in terms of tightening down the components as opposed to the shallow grubs. Also, cap screws can also be used for this application. However, I feel that the M6 cap screws have a little bit of a taller stance on them, which may lead to snagging of debris when the tank isn't actually in operation. Along with the button head screw, there's the other side mounted fastener that gets mounted. Once both of these fasteners are locked down in place, the swing arm is fully functional. After all the swing arms are on, you should be able to test the pieces. As you can see, they bounce right back up after a load is pressed onto them. The suspension now is ready for its running gear. With the suspension now mounted to the vehicle, I can take this opportunity to show an interesting comparison between the current 2015 version of the Armortek Tiger 1 compared with a first generation 2003 vintage Tiger 1. Starting with the interior, this is of the 2015 current generation Armortek Tiger 1. And this here is the 2003 vintage Armortek first generation Tiger 1. As you can see, the design is the same, but also different. This version here is a more primitive version of the same suspension compared to its 2015 counterpart. As for performance, both suspensions, when properly assembled, should perform quite well when the vehicle is in operation. Same comparison can be made with the swing arms. This is of the 2015 Tiger 1, and this is the 2003 version. And that concludes this project update video for this 1/6 scale Armortek Early Production German Tiger 1. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook. And don't forget to check out eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thank you.